I never thought a handheld salt spreader would turn me into the neighborhood villain, but that was before I met Brenda Oakley, the woman who ran our HOA like a personal fiefdom in suburban Cleveland, Ohio. My name is Lucas Porter, and I had lived in Maplewood Estates for exactly 3 months when the trouble started. The subdivision was one of those planned communities that looked perfect in the brochures, with cookie-cutter colonials and manicured lawns that all had to be maintained according to strict guidelines. I bought my house in September, eager to settle into a quiet life after my divorce, and everything seemed fine until the first real snowfall hit in late November. I was out at 7 in the morning, dressed in my heavy coat and work gloves, spreading salt on my driveway and the sidewalk in front of my house. The tool I was using was a simple broadcast spreader, the kind you can buy at any hardware store for $40. You fill it with rock salt, turn the crank, and it tosses the salt out in a wide arc. Nothing fancy, nothing loud, just efficient. I had learned the hard way in my old neighborhood that unsalted walkways were a lawsuit waiting to happen, and I was not about to let some poor mail carrier or neighbor break their neck on my property. I was halfway through the sidewalk when I heard her voice cut through the cold morning air like a knife through butter. "Excuse me. Excuse me." The tone was sharp, demanding immediate attention. I looked up to see a woman in her late 40s marching toward me from across the street. She wore a puffy white jacket that made her look like a marshmallow with legs, and her blonde hair was pulled back so tight I wondered if it was giving her a headache. Her face was already pinched in disapproval before she even reached me. "Can I help you?" I asked, pausing my work. "I certainly hope so. I am Brenda Oakley, the president of the Maplewood Estates Homeowners Association, and I need to discuss your equipment with you." She gestured at my salt spreader like I was holding a weapon. My salt spreader? I glanced down at the innocuous red plastic device in my hands. "What about it?" "It is creating an unsightly mess on the sidewalk and street. The salt you are spreading is being thrown everywhere, including onto the grass, which violates our landscaping guidelines. Additionally, you are doing this work before 8 in the morning, which is technically a violation of our noise ordinance." I stared at her for a moment, waiting for the punchline that never came. "You are joking, right? This thing is not even loud, and I am spreading salt to keep people safe. We just got 4 inches of snow overnight." "I am well aware of the weather, Mr. Porter. However, the HOA guidelines clearly state that all snow removal activities must be conducted in a manner that does not damage community property or private landscaping. Your method is excessively messy and potentially harmful to the grass and plants along the walkway." "It is salt," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level. "People have been using salt to melt ice for decades, and the alternative is someone slipping and getting hurt." Brenda's expression hardened. "The alternative is that you spread the salt by hand or use a more precise method that does not scatter it indiscriminately. I have already received complaints from 2 other residents about the mess. Complaints about me keeping the sidewalk safe." I felt my jaw tighten. "Who complained?" "That information is confidential, but I am here to inform you that if you continue to use that spreader, you will be fined $50 per incident as outlined in Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA bylaws." I took a deep breath, feeling the cold air burn in my lungs. This was insane. I had barely been living here for 3 months, and already I was being harassed over basic winter maintenance. "Look, Brenda, I appreciate you doing your job, but I am not going to stop making my property safe for people to walk on. If you want to fine me, go ahead, but I think you would find it pretty hard to defend in any reasonable setting." Her face flushed red, visible even in the cold morning light. Mr. Porter, I suggest you review the bylaws you signed when you purchased your home. The HOA has full authority to enforce community standards, and I will not hesitate to pursue all available remedies if you refuse to comply. This is your only warning. She turned on her heel and marched back across the street to her own house, which I now noticed had a completely unsalted driveway and sidewalk. The irony was not lost on me. I watched her navigate the slippery concrete with tiny, careful steps, clinging to the handrail of her porch like her life depended on it. I finished spreading salt on my property, doing exactly what I had been doing before she interrupted me. If she wanted to find me, let her try. I was not about to risk someone getting injured just to appease some power-hungry HOA president with nothing better to do than patrol the neighborhood looking for violations. The formal violation notice arrived in my mailbox 2 days later. It was printed on official HOA letterhead with the Maplewood Estates logo at the top, a little illustration of a maple leaf that probably cost them $1,000 to design. The letter informed me that I was in violation of sections 12.4 and 7.2 of the community bylaws, and that I was being assessed a $50 fine for improper snow removal methods and a $25 fine for early morning disturbance. I had 10 days to pay or face additional penalties. I spent that evening reading through the entire HOA bylaws document, all 47 pages of dense legal language and arbitrary rules. Section 12.4 did indeed mention that property owners were responsible for ensuring that snow removal activities did not damage common areas or neighboring properties. However, there was nothing specific about salt spreaders or the method of application. Section 7.2 covered noise ordinances, defining excessive noise as anything exceeding 65 decibels between the hours of 10 p.m. and 8 a.m. A hand-crank salt spreader barely made any sound at all, certainly nothing close to 65 decibels. The more I read, the clearer it became that Brenda was interpreting these rules as loosely as possible to justify her complaint. I drafted a response letter explaining why I believed the fines were unwarranted and citing the specific language in the bylaws. I dropped it off at her house the next day, sliding it into her mailbox since she had listed her home address as the official HOA correspondence location. Her response came even faster than the original violation notice. This time, she had escalated the matter. The new letter informed me that my appeal had been denied, and that failure to pay the fines within the remaining 7 days would result in additional penalties of $10 per day, plus potential legal action to place a lien on my property. She had also scheduled a special HOA board meeting to discuss my continued defiance of community standards. I called my real estate lawyer, a guy named Tom Chen who had handled my home purchase. He listened to my story and then let out a long sigh. Lucas, HOAs can be tricky. Technically, they do have the authority to enforce their bylaws and assess fines. The question is whether their interpretation of those bylaws is reasonable. From what you are telling me, it sounds like this Brenda person is reaching pretty far to justify these violations. So what do I do? I asked. You have a few options. You can pay the fines and comply with her demands, which I know you do not want to do. You can refuse to pay and force them to take you to court, where you could argue that their interpretation is unreasonable. Or you can try to work within the system, attend the board meeting and make your case to the other board members. Who are the other board members? That should be in your HOA documents. Usually, there is a president, vice president, treasurer, and a couple of at-large members. If you can convince the majority that Brenda is being unreasonable, you might be able to get the fines waived. I dug through my closing documents until I found the HOA information sheet. The board consisted of 5 members: Brenda Oakley as president, Margaret Sullivan as vice president, Richard Torres as treasurer, and 2 at-large members named Jennifer Kim and David Walsh. I did not know any of them personally, but I decided Tom was right. I needed to attend the meeting and fight this ridiculous fine. The meeting was held the following Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood entrance that was used for HOA gatherings and the occasional resident event. I arrived 15 minutes early and found the room already set up with a long table at the front for the board members and several rows of folding chairs for residents. To my surprise, about a dozen other people were already there, including a few I recognized from around the neighborhood. Brenda arrived precisely at 7, flanked by the other board members. She took her seat at the center of the table and called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a gavel that she had apparently brought for the occasion. The formality of it all would have been comical if it were not so aggravating. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for attending tonight's special session of the Maplewood Estates HOA Board. We have several items on the agenda, but the primary matter concerns ongoing violations by one of our residents. She looked directly at me as she said this. Mr. Lucas Porter, would you please stand? I stood, feeling the eyes of everyone in the room turn toward me. Mr. Porter has been cited for improper snow removal methods and disturbance of the peace. He has refused to pay the assessed fines and has submitted a letter disputing the violations. As per our bylaws, he has the right to address the board before we make a final determination. Mr. Porter, you have 5 minutes. I walked to the front of the room, very aware of how absurd this situation was. Thank you. I will keep this brief because I think the facts speak for themselves. On the morning of November 28th, I was spreading salt on my driveway and sidewalk using a standard broadcast spreader. This is a common tool that thousands of homeowners use every winter to keep their properties safe. Mrs. Oakley approached me and claimed that I was violating HOA rules because the salt was being spread in a messy manner and because I was doing it before 8 a.m. I pulled out my phone and showed a photo I had taken of the salt spreader. This is the tool in question. It is hand-cranked, makes almost no noise, and is specifically designed for residential use. I was not blasting music, running a snowblower, or doing anything that would reasonably disturb my neighbors. I was maintaining my property to prevent injuries. Margaret Sullivan, the vice president, leaned forward. She was an older woman with gray hair and a kind face. Mr. Porter, can you help me understand why you cannot simply spread the salt by hand? That would address Mrs. Oakley's concerns about the salt being scattered. I could, I said, but it would take much longer, be less effective, and still result in salt on the ground, which is the entire point. The spreader ensures even coverage, which actually uses less salt overall and works better. And frankly, I do not believe there is anything in our bylaws that prohibits the use of standard maintenance equipment. Richard Torres, the treasurer, flipped through a copy of the bylaws. I am looking at section 12.4 right now, and I do not see any specific prohibition against salt spreaders. It says we are responsible for not damaging common areas, but if Mr. Porter is spreading salt on his own property and the public sidewalk, I am not sure how that applies. Brenda's face reddened. The salt is being scattered onto the grass and potentially into the street, which is a common area. And the point is not just about what is explicitly prohibited, but about maintaining the aesthetic standards of our community. Excessive salt creates white residue and can damage landscaping. So can ice and snow, I said. And so can people falling and cracking their heads open. I would think safety would be a higher priority than aesthetics. One of the residents in the audience raised her hand. Brenda acknowledged her with obvious reluctance. "Hi, I am Susan Reeves. I live on Oakmont Drive. I just wanted to say that I appreciate that Mr. Porter is keeping his sidewalk safe. My daughter walks past his house on her way to the bus stop, and I feel better knowing the sidewalk is cleared and salted. I think this complaint is ridiculous." A few other people murmured agreement. Brenda banged her gavel again. "Order, please. This is not a town hall. We are here to determine whether Mr. Porter violated the bylaws, not to take a popularity poll." Jennifer Kim, one of the at-large members, spoke up. "With all due respect, Brenda, I think we need to consider whether the interpretation of the bylaws is reasonable. I use a similar spreader at my house, and I was not aware that this was against the rules. If we are going to start fining people for basic snow removal, we need to be very clear about what is and is not allowed." David Walsh, the other at-large member, nodded. "I agree with Jennifer. This seems like an overreach. Mr. Porter is not doing anything that most of us do not do ourselves." Brenda looked around the table, clearly not expecting this level of pushback from her own board members. "Fine. Let us put it to a vote. All in favor of upholding the fines against Mr. Porter?" Brenda raised her hand. No one else did. All opposed, Margaret, Richard, Jennifer, and David all raised their hands. Brenda's jaw tightened. The motion fails. The fines are dismissed. She looked at me with barely concealed anger. "You are free to go, Mr. Porter." I nodded to the board and walked out of the clubhouse, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. I had won this battle, but something told me the war was far from over. Over the next few days, I noticed Brenda watching me from her window whenever I was outside. It was unnerving, like having a surveillance camera pointed at my house at all times. She was clearly not happy about being overruled by her own board, and I suspected she was looking for any opportunity to catch me in another violation. Then the real snow came. On December 5th, Cleveland was hit with a major winter storm that dumped nearly 10 inches of snow overnight. I woke up at 6 in the morning and spent 2 hours clearing my driveway with a snowblower, and then carefully salting all the walkways. I made a point of being extra thorough, ensuring that the salt was spread evenly and that none of it went onto the grass. I even swept up the excess from the edges of the driveway. When I finished, I looked across the street at Brenda's house. Her driveway and walkway were completely untouched, buried under nearly a foot of snow. I wondered if she was planning to clear it at all, or if she was waiting for it to melt naturally to avoid violating her own strict interpretation of the rules. I went inside, took a hot shower, and headed to work. I was a project manager for a construction company, and we had a big meeting scheduled with a potential client. The day was long and exhausting, and by the time I got home at 6 that evening, it was already dark. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed an ambulance parked in front of Brenda's house, its red lights flashing in the darkness. Several neighbors were standing on their porches, watching. I parked and walked over to see what had happened. One of my neighbors, an older man named Frank who lived 2 doors down, filled me in. Brenda took a bad fall on her front steps. Apparently she had not salted them and she slipped on some ice. Ambulance got here about 20 minutes ago. Is she okay? I asked, feeling a strange mix of concern and irony. Heard one of the paramedics say it might be a broken ankle. They are taking her to Metro Hospital. I watched as the paramedics wheeled Brenda out on a stretcher. Even from a distance, I could see her face was twisted in pain. She had a blanket pulled up to her chin, and her right leg was immobilized in some kind of temporary splint. As the ambulance pulled away, Frank shook his head. You know, she was just giving you grief the other week about salting your walk. Now look what happens. Karma is real, man. I did not say anything, but I thought the same thing. Brenda had been so focused on complaining about my salt spreader that she had not bothered to take care of her own property, and now she was paying the price. The next morning, I was having coffee when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Margaret Sullivan, the HOA vice president, standing on my porch. Margaret, good morning. What can I do for you? Hi, Lucas. I am sorry to bother you so early, but I wanted to talk to you about what happened to Brenda. Can I come in for a minute? I stepped aside and let her in. We sat in my living room, and she got straight to the point. As you probably heard, Brenda broke her ankle yesterday on her front steps. She is going to be out of commission for at least 6 to 8 weeks, maybe longer. That means I am going to be acting as the HOA president in the interim. I am sorry to hear she was hurt, I said carefully. I am sure you are, Margaret said with a slight smile. Look, I am going to be honest with you. Brenda has been a difficult president. She means well, but she tends to interpret the rules very strictly and does not always consider the practical side of things. I wanted you to know that I do not intend to continue her crusade against your salt spreader or any other reasonable maintenance activities. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I appreciate that, Margaret. I just want to take care of my property and not cause any problems. I understand, and I think most of the board feels the same way. We are going to be reviewing some of the bylaws over the next few months to clarify what is and is not allowed, especially when it comes to winter maintenance. In the meantime, just keep doing what you are doing. If your sidewalk is safe and well maintained, that is all we can ask for. We chatted for a few more minutes, and then Margaret left. I felt better about the HOA situation, but I could not shake the nagging feeling that Brenda was not going to let this go, even from her hospital bed. I was right. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from a law firm in downtown Cleveland. The letter informed me that Brenda Oakley was exploring potential legal action against me for creating a hazardous condition that had allegedly contributed to her injury. The claim was absurd on its face since I had nothing to do with her unsalted steps, but it was clear that Brenda was looking for someone to blame for her own negligence. I immediately called Tom Chen, my lawyer. He read through the letter and let out a low whistle. This is a stretch, Lucas. She is trying to argue that your use of the salt spreader created a precedent of over-salting in the neighborhood, which somehow made her feel pressured to not salt her own walkway adequately. It is a ridiculous argument, but the fact that she has a lawyer sending letters means she is serious. What do I need to do? For now, nothing. This is not a lawsuit, just a threat of one. If she actually files, we will respond and likely get it dismissed pretty quickly. But I want to document everything. Do you have any photos of your property from that day? Any witnesses who can confirm that you were only salting your own walkway? I thought about it. I have some photos on my phone from when I cleared the snow, and I am sure some of my neighbors saw me. Frank, the guy 2 doors down, he was out that morning too. Good. Send me those photos and get a statement from Frank if you can. I want to be prepared in case this goes anywhere. Over the next week, I collected evidence and talked to my neighbors. Most of them were sympathetic and more than willing to provide statements supporting me. Frank even offered to testify in court if it came to that, saying he would be happy to tell a judge how ridiculous Brenda was being. Meanwhile, Brenda was apparently not recovering quietly. According to neighborhood gossip, she had been calling other board members from the hospital, insisting that they pursue action against me for reckless snow removal practices. Margaret had apparently told her in no uncertain terms that the board was not going to support any further action, and that Brenda needed to focus on her recovery. Then came the bombshell. 2 weeks after her accident, I received another letter, this time not from Brenda's lawyer but from the Cleveland Police Department. It was a request for an interview regarding a complaint of harassment and property damage filed by Brenda Oakley. I called Tom immediately. "What the hell is this?" "She is escalating. Let me make some calls and find out what is going on. Do not talk to the police without me present." The next day, Tom and I met with Detective Sarah Monroe at the police station. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who seemed tired before the interview even started. "Mr. Porter, thank you for coming in. I want to be upfront with you. I have reviewed the complaint filed by Mrs. Oakley and frankly it seems frivolous, but I am required to investigate, so I need to ask you some questions." "Of course," I said. "Mrs. Oakley claims that you have been engaged in a pattern of harassment toward her, including intentionally oversalting your property to damage hers, using loud equipment early in the morning to disturb her peace, and making threatening statements at an HOA meeting. She also claims that your actions created unsafe conditions that directly led to her injury. Can you respond to these allegations?" I took a deep breath and went through everything that had happened, from the first confrontation to the HOA meeting to the day of Brenda's accident. Tom provided documentation, including photos, witness statements, and the board meeting minutes showing that the other members had sided with me. Detective Monroe listened carefully, taking notes. When I finished, she closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Porter, based on what you have told me and the evidence I have seen, I do not believe there is any basis for criminal charges here. This is clearly a civil dispute between you and Mrs. Oakley, and it should be handled through the HOA or civil court, not the criminal justice system. I am going to close this complaint and note that no further action is warranted." I felt a huge sense of relief. "Thank you, Detective. However," she continued, "I am going to have a conversation with Mrs. Oakley about filing false police reports. If she continues to make baseless accusations, she could face charges herself." Tom and I left the station, and I felt like I could finally breathe again. But Tom had a serious expression on his face. "Lucas, I think we need to consider taking action ourselves. Brenda is clearly not going to stop, and her false accusations could damage your reputation. I recommend we file a cease and desist letter and potentially pursue a defamation claim if she continues." "I just want this to be over," I said. "Is that really necessary?" "It might be. Let me draft something and send it to her. At minimum, it will put her on notice that you are not going to tolerate her baseless attacks." Tom sent the cease and desist letter the following week. It was a strongly worded document that outlined all of Brenda's actions, including the false police report, and demanded that she stop all harassment and refrain from making any further false statements about me. The letter also warned that continued violations would result in legal action for defamation and harassment. For a few weeks, things were quiet. Brenda was apparently still recovering from her ankle surgery and was not venturing out much. I continued my normal routine, salting my walkways whenever it snowed and maintaining my property according to reasonable standards. Then, in mid-January, I received a call from Margaret. She sounded upset. "Lucas, I need to tell you something. Brenda is trying to call an emergency board meeting to have you removed from the community." "Removed? Can she even do that?" "Technically, the HOA can take action to force a sale if a homeowner is in persistent violation of the bylaws. But it requires a unanimous vote from the board and approval from 2/3 of the community. She does not have anywhere near that kind of support, but she is trying to rally people by claiming you are a danger to the neighborhood. This is insane. What do I need to do?" Just show up to the meeting. It is scheduled for next Tuesday. I am going to recommend that the board reject her motion outright, but you should be there to defend yourself if needed." The following Tuesday, the community clubhouse was packed. Word had spread about the meeting, and it seemed like half the neighborhood had turned out to see what would happen. I arrived with Tom, who insisted on coming as my legal representation. Brenda was there too, seated at the board table with her leg in a walking boot and a crutch leaning against her chair. She looked thinner and paler than before, but her expression was as determined as ever. Margaret called the meeting to order. "Good evening, everyone. We are here because Mrs. Oakley has requested an emergency session to discuss the ongoing issues with Mr. Porter. Brenda, you have the floor." Brenda stood awkwardly, leaning on the table for support. "Thank you, Margaret. I know many of you think I am being unreasonable, but I am trying to protect this community. Mr. Porter has shown a blatant disregard for our rules and has created an environment where other residents feel they can ignore the bylaws as well. His reckless use of salt and snow removal equipment has damaged common areas, and his refusal to comply with reasonable requests has undermined the authority of this board." She paused for effect, looking around the room. "But more than that, his actions directly contributed to my injury. If he had not been so aggressive with his salting, I would not have felt pressured to avoid salting my own walkway for fear of violating the same standards he was ignoring. As a result, I suffered a serious injury that required surgery and months of recovery." There were a few murmurs in the crowd, but I could see that most people were not buying it. Frank stood up from his seat. "That is the biggest load of garbage I have ever heard. Brenda, you did not salt your walkway because you are too stubborn to admit you were wrong about Lucas. He was doing exactly what he should have been doing, and you were so busy trying to punish him that you neglected your own property. That is on you, not him." Several people applauded. Brenda's face turned red. "This is exactly the problem. Mr. Porter has turned the community against me and has created a hostile environment where I cannot even do my job as president." Margaret raised her hand. "Brenda, I think we need to be clear about something. You are not currently serving as president. I am acting president while you recover. And in that capacity, I have reviewed your claims against Mr. Porter, and I find them completely without merit. He has not violated any bylaws, he has not damaged any property, and he certainly has not caused your injury. Your motion to remove him is denied." "You cannot deny it without a vote," Brenda protested. "Fine. Let us vote. All in favor of pursuing action to remove Mr. Porter from the community." Brenda raised her hand. No one else did. All opposed, Margaret, Richard, Jennifer, and David all raised their hands. "The motion fails," Margaret said firmly. "And Brenda, I need to tell you something in front of everyone here. Your behavior over the past 2 months has been inappropriate and damaging to this community. You have harassed a resident over a non-issue, filed a false police report, and wasted everyone's time with baseless accusations. If you continue down this path, I will call for a vote to remove you as president permanently." The room erupted in applause. Brenda stood there, her face a mixture of shock and fury. She grabbed her crutch and limped toward the door, turning back only to say, "You have not heard the last of this." But we had. After that meeting, Brenda stopped attending HOA functions altogether. She eventually resigned as president in March, citing health reasons, and moved out of the neighborhood by the end of April. I heard through the grapevine that she sold her house and relocated to a different suburb where she could start fresh. Margaret took over as permanent president and immediately began working on revising the bylaws to make them clearer and more reasonable. The updated rules explicitly allowed for the use of standard snow removal equipment, including salt spreaders, as long as they were used responsibly. The community became a much more pleasant place to live, and I finally felt like I could relax and enjoy my home without constantly looking over my shoulder. Looking back on the whole ordeal, I realized that Brenda's downfall was entirely of her own making. She had been so obsessed with control and enforcing petty rules that she lost sight of what actually mattered, keeping the community safe and functional. Her refusal to salt her own walkway, born out of stubborn pride and a misguided attempt to prove a point, had resulted in a serious injury that could have been easily prevented. As for me, I continued to use my salt spreader every winter without issue. My sidewalk was always clear and safe, and my neighbors appreciated it. I even started helping some of the elderly residents on my street with their snow removal, using that same red plastic spreader that had caused so much trouble. In the end, the lesson was simple. Common sense and basic decency will always win out over petty tyranny. And sometimes, karma really does have a way of evening the score. The months that followed brought a kind of peace to Maplewood Estates that I had not experienced since moving in. Margaret proved to be an excellent HOA president, focused on practical matters rather than power trips. She organized community events, addressed legitimate maintenance concerns, and generally made the neighborhood feel like a real community rather than a police state. But the story did not quite end there. In late February, I received an unexpected visitor. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in my garage organizing tools when a sleek black sedan pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 30s stepped out, dressed in a professional suit and carrying a briefcase. "Mr. Porter, Lucas Porter," she called out. "That is me," I said, wiping grease from my hands with a rag. "My name is Amanda Crawford. I am an attorney representing the law firm of Patterson and Associates. I wanted to talk to you about Brenda Oakley." My stomach tightened. I thought all of that was over. It is, in a sense. Mrs. Oakley is not pursuing any further action against you. In fact, that is why I am here. "May I come in?" I led her into my kitchen, and we sat at the table. She pulled out a folder from her briefcase and set it between us. "Mr. Porter, I am not here on behalf of Mrs. Oakley. I am here representing 3 other residents of Maplewood Estates who had similar experiences with her. They are considering a class action lawsuit against Mrs. Oakley for harassment, abuse of authority, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. They asked me to reach out to you because your case is particularly well documented, and they believe your testimony could be valuable." I was stunned. Other people, who? I cannot share their names without their permission, but I can tell you that Mrs. Oakley had a pattern of targeting residents over minor or fabricated violations. In one case, she fined a family repeatedly for having a basketball hoop in their driveway, claiming it was an eyesore, even though the bylaws did not prohibit it. In another, she reported a resident to code enforcement for having decorative garden gnomes, saying they violated aesthetic standards. These people suffered months of harassment and spent thousands of dollars fighting unjust fines. I thought about everything Brenda had put me through: the stress, the legal fees, the constant feeling of being watched and judged. What would this lawsuit accomplish? Primarily, it would seek compensation for the damages these residents suffered, including legal fees, fines paid under duress, and emotional distress. It would also send a message that HOA officers cannot abuse their authority without consequences. Would you be willing to participate? I took a deep breath. Part of me wanted to move on and forget about Brenda entirely, but another part of me knew that people like her needed to face real consequences for their actions, or they would just continue the same behavior elsewhere. "Let me think about it," I said. "Can I contact you in a few days?" Of course. She handed me her business card. Take your time. But I will say this. Mrs. Oakley has a history of this behavior. Before she moved to Maplewood Estates, she was involved in similar disputes at 2 other communities. This is a pattern, not an isolated incident. After Amanda left, I spent the rest of the weekend thinking about what to do. I talked to Frank, who told me he had also been contacted by the attorney. He was planning to participate. She needs to be stopped, Frank said. People like Brenda think they can just walk all over everyone else, and nobody ever holds them accountable. This is our chance to actually do something about it. I also talked to Tom Chen, who reviewed the information Amanda had provided. It is a solid case, he said. If you participate, you would likely just need to provide testimony and documentation. The emotional distress angle might be hard to prove for financial damages, but the harassment and abuse of authority claims are strong. And if she has a pattern of this behavior, that strengthens everything. In the end, I decided to join the lawsuit. It was not about the money, though recovering my legal fees would be nice. It was about standing up to bullying and making sure Brenda understood that her actions had real consequences. The lawsuit was filed in late March. Along with me, 5 other residents of Maplewood Estates joined as plaintiffs. The case quickly gained local media attention, with several Cleveland news outlets running stories about HOA abuse and the growing trend of overzealous community boards harassing residents. Brenda initially tried to fight the lawsuit, hiring her own attorney and filing a motion to dismiss. She argued that her actions were protected because she was acting in her capacity as HOA president, and that the residents had agreed to abide by the bylaws when they purchased their homes. But the court did not see it that way. In a hearing in early May, the judge denied her motion to dismiss, stating that HOA officers are not immune from liability when they abuse their authority or engage in harassing behavior. The judge also noted that Brenda's pattern of targeting residents over minor or non-existent violations suggested that her actions were motivated by personal animosity rather than legitimate enforcement of community standards. Faced with a trial and mounting legal fees, Brenda eventually agreed to settle. The terms of the settlement were confidential, but I can say that all of the plaintiffs received compensation for their legal fees and other expenses. More importantly, the settlement included a provision that Brenda would not serve in any HOA leadership capacity for a period of 10 years and would be required to attend mediation training. The case also prompted a broader conversation within Maplewood Estates about HOA governance. The board, now led by Margaret, implemented new procedures to prevent abuse of authority. This included requiring board approval for any fines over $25, establishing a formal appeals process with neutral arbitration, and creating term limits for board officers. The community also voted to amend the bylaws to remove vague or overly restrictive provisions, focusing instead on legitimate health, safety, and property value concerns. By the time summer arrived, life in Maplewood Estates had transformed. The neighborhood felt more relaxed, more friendly. People were not afraid to put up a basketball hoop or plant flowers that might not be on the approved list. The HOA still existed, but it functioned as it should, as a tool to maintain common areas and address genuine issues, not as a weapon for petty tyrants. I settled into a comfortable routine. Work was going well, and I had even started dating someone I met at a community barbecue that Margaret organized. Her name was Rachel, and she lived a few streets over. She had her own Brenda stories, though nothing as extreme as mine. We bonded over our shared relief that the neighborhood was finally a pleasant place to live. One evening in late June, I was sitting on my back deck with Rachel, watching the sun set over the subdivision. We were talking about nothing in particular, just enjoying the warm weather and each other's company when she asked me about the whole salt spreader saga. "You ever regret moving here?" she asked. After everything that happened with Brenda, I thought about it for a moment. Honestly, no. I mean, it was awful at the time, and I would not want to go through it again. But it also brought the community together in a way. People realized that we needed to stand up for each other and not let one person ruin things for everyone. And now we have a functioning HOA that actually makes sense. So in a weird way, maybe it all worked out. "That is a very mature perspective," Rachel said with a smile. "Well, I am a very mature person," I said, grinning. She laughed and threw a piece of ice from her drink at me. "Sure you are." We sat there as the sky turned from orange to pink to purple, and I felt genuinely content. The whole ordeal with Brenda had been exhausting and frustrating, but it had also taught me something important, that communities are only as good as the people in them, and that sometimes you have to fight for common sense and decency to prevail. The next winter came, and with it, more snow. On the first significant snowfall in December, I was out early with my trusty red salt spreader, clearing my driveway and sidewalk just like always. Frank waved to me from his driveway, where he was doing the same thing. "Still using that dangerous contraband, I see," he called out, laughing. "Absolutely. Living on the edge," I called back. As I finished spreading the last of the salt, I looked across the street at what used to be Brenda's house. A young couple had moved in over the summer, and they had already become friendly with everyone on the block. They were out together, shoveling their walkway and laughing at something one of them had said. Their driveway was neatly cleared, and I could see they had salted their front steps. It was such a simple thing, but it represented everything that had changed. The neighborhood was no longer a place of fear and arbitrary rules. It was a place where people looked out for each other, where common sense prevailed, and where a simple salt spreader was just a tool for keeping people safe, nothing more and nothing less. I put my spreader away in the garage and went inside to make coffee. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. The HOA board was meeting later that week to discuss plans for a neighborhood holiday party, and she wanted my input on activities. I smiled and typed back a reply saying I would be there. Life in Maplewood Estates had become what I had hoped it would be when I first moved in. Quiet, peaceful, and normal. And I had a battle-scarred salt spreader to thank for it. As the weeks turned into months, the neighborhood continued to thrive under Margaret's leadership. The holiday party in December was a huge success, with over 100 residents attending. Kids played in the snow while adults shared hot chocolate and stories. It was the kind of community event that brought people together rather than driving them apart. I found myself becoming more involved in neighborhood activities. I joined the committee that maintained the common areas, volunteering to help with spring cleanup and fall leaf removal. It felt good to be part of something positive, to contribute to the community in a meaningful way rather than just fighting against unreasonable restrictions. Rachel and I grew closer too. By spring, we were spending most of our free time together, and I started to think seriously about our future. She was everything I had not known I was looking for. Kind, funny, practical, and completely unbothered by HOA drama. She had actually laughed when I told her the full story of the salt spreader incident, saying it sounded like something out of a sitcom. In March, we took a weekend trip to Put-in-Bay on Lake Erie. It was still cold, but the island was beautiful, and we spent our time exploring, eating at local restaurants and talking about everything and nothing. On our last evening there, as we walked along the waterfront watching the sunset, I realized I was happier than I had been in years. "Thank you for coming with me," I said, taking her hand. "Thank you for inviting me," she replied, squeezing my fingers. "This has been perfect." We stood there in comfortable silence, and I thought about how much had changed since that morning when Brenda had first confronted me about my salt spreader. At the time, it had felt like such a huge problem, an insurmountable obstacle to peace and happiness. But in retrospect, it was just a bump in the road, a challenge that had ultimately led to positive change. When we got back to Maplewood Estates, there was news waiting. Frank caught me as I was unloading luggage from my car. "You are not going to believe this," he said, practically vibrating with excitement. "Brenda got arrested. I nearly dropped the suitcase I was holding." "What for what?" "Fraud. Apparently, she was embezzling money from the HOA at her previous neighborhood. The prosecutor started investigating after our lawsuit, and they found out she had been skimming money from the community funds for years. She would approve fake invoices for maintenance work that never happened and pocket the difference. They estimate she stole over $50,000. I was stunned. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. It was on the news this morning. She is being charged with multiple counts of theft and fraud. If convicted, she could face prison time." Rachel had joined us by now, and she looked equally shocked. "That explains a lot." "I mean, someone who would abuse their authority over a salt spreader probably would not have any problem stealing money." Frank nodded. "Right? Anyway, I thought you would want to know. Margaret is calling an emergency board meeting tomorrow to discuss what this means for our community. Apparently, there is a chance we could recover some of the money if she stole from our HOA too." The board meeting the next evening was packed. Margaret stood at the front of the room with a serious expression. "I am sure you have all heard the news about Brenda Oakley's arrest. The board has been working with an attorney to review our financial records from the time she was president. I am sorry to report that we have found irregularities that suggest she may have stolen funds from our community as well." There were gasps and angry murmurs throughout the room. Margaret held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. We have identified approximately $12,000 in questionable expenses during Brenda's tenure. This includes invoices for landscaping work that does not appear to have been performed, maintenance on equipment the HOA does not own, and several other suspicious charges. We are working with law enforcement and have provided all of our records to the prosecutor handling her case." Richard Torres, the treasurer, spoke up. "I want to apologize to everyone here. I should have caught these discrepancies when they happened. Brenda was very convincing in her explanations, and I trusted her. That was a mistake." Margaret shook her head. "Richard, you are not to blame. Brenda was manipulative and deceptive. She fooled all of us. What matters now is that we take steps to ensure this never happens again. We are implementing new financial controls, including requiring dual signatures on all checks over $500 and quarterly audits by an independent accountant." The community was understandably upset, but there was also a sense of vindication. Brenda's true nature had been exposed, and justice was being served. The fact that she had not only harassed residents but also stolen from them made her actions even more reprehensible. Over the following months, the case against Brenda moved through the legal system. The prosecutor charged her with multiple felony counts, including theft, fraud, and abuse of authority. The evidence was overwhelming: invoices for work that was never completed, bank records showing deposits into her personal account that matched the amounts of the fraudulent expenses, and testimony from contractors who confirmed they had never been paid for the work they supposedly did. In September, almost a year after the initial salt spreader incident, Brenda pleaded guilty to avoid a trial. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, followed by 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to all the communities she had defrauded, including Maplewood Estates. While it was unlikely we would recover all of the stolen money, the court ordered her to pay at least a portion of it back over time. The sentencing brought a sense of closure to the entire ordeal. Brenda had not only been held accountable for her harassment and abuse of authority, but also for her criminal actions. The community could finally move forward without the shadow of her misconduct hanging over us. For me personally, the whole experience had been transformative. I had learned to stand up for myself, to fight for what was right even when it was difficult, and to trust that justice would eventually prevail. I had also learned the value of community and the importance of having neighbors who would support each other in times of trouble. By the time autumn arrived, Rachel and I had moved in together. We decided to keep my house since it was larger and had the better yard. On our first weekend living together, we hosted a barbecue and invited all of our neighbors. Frank came, of course, along with Margaret and several other board members. The new couple who lived in Brenda's old house came too, bringing homemade potato salad and a 6-pack of local craft beer. As I stood at the grill, flipping burgers and chatting with friends, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. The salt spreader that had caused so much trouble was tucked away in my garage, ready for the next winter. But now it was just a tool, nothing more. The drama and conflict it had symbolized were gone, replaced by genuine friendship and community. Frank raised his beer in a toast to Lucas for having the guts to stand up to a tyrant and the patience to see it through, and to the rest of us for finally having a neighborhood worth living in. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment and pride. "I just wanted to salt my driveway," I said, laughing. "And in doing so, you salted the earth for tyrants everywhere," Frank said dramatically, making everyone laugh. The party went late into the evening with people lingering on the deck and in the yard, talking and laughing under the stars. At one point, Rachel pulled me aside and kissed me. "I am proud of you," she said, "for everything you went through and how you handled it." "I just did what anyone would do," I said. "No," she said firmly. "Most people would have given in or moved away. You stayed and fought for what was right. That takes courage." I kissed her back, feeling the warmth of the evening and the company of good people around me. The journey had been difficult, but it had led me exactly where I needed to be. As winter approached again, I made sure my salt spreader was in good working condition. When the first snow fell in November, I was ready. I went out early, spread salt on my driveway and sidewalk, and made sure everything was safe and clear. Several of my neighbors were doing the same thing, and we waved to each other as we worked. No one complained. No one filed a violation report. No one threatened fines or legal action. It was just a normal winter morning in a normal neighborhood, with people taking care of their properties and looking out for each other. And that, I realized, was exactly what a community should be. The story could have ended there, with everything neatly resolved and everyone living happily ever after. But life is rarely that simple, and there was one more chapter to the saga that I did not see coming. It was a cold day in late January, almost exactly a year since Brenda had broken her ankle. I was at work when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Lucas Porter?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Brenda Oakley. I am Brenda Oakley's daughter." I felt my heart rate spike. "Okay, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to apologize to you in person for everything my mother put you through. I know this might sound strange, but I am going to be in Cleveland next week, and I was hoping we could meet for coffee. I promise I am not looking to cause any trouble. I just want to talk." I hesitated. The last thing I wanted was to dredge up all the drama again, but there was something in her voice that sounded genuine, almost pleading. "All right," I said finally. "There is a coffee shop called Brenda Awakening on Cedar Road. Do you know it? I can find it. Would Thursday at 2 o'clock work for you?" "That works. I will see you then." I spent the next few days wondering what this was about. I told Rachel about the call and she was skeptical. What if it is some kind of trap? What if she is trying to get you to say something that her mother can use against you? "Brenda is in prison," I pointed out. "What could she possibly do at this point?" "I do not know, but I do not trust anyone with that last name." Despite Rachel's concerns, I went to the coffee shop on Thursday. Brenda Oakley was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of her. She was in her early 30s, with dark hair and a tired expression. She looked nothing like Brenda. "Lucas?" she asked as I approached. "That is me, Brenda." "Yes, thank you for meeting me. I got you a coffee. I hope black is okay. I did not know what you liked." "Black is fine, thank you." I sat down across from her, studying her carefully. She took a deep breath. "I am not going to waste your time with small talk. I wanted to apologize for my mother's behavior. I know what she put you and your neighbors through, and I am ashamed of her actions." "Why are you apologizing? You did not do anything." "Because someone from our family needs to, and she never will. My mother has always been like this, controlling, manipulative, convinced that she is always right. It ruined my childhood, it destroyed my parents' marriage, and now it has landed her in prison. I have spent years in therapy trying to undo the damage she caused." I did not know what to say. Brenda looked like she was about to cry. "When I heard about what happened in your neighborhood, I was not surprised. This is who she is. She finds communities where she can exert control, and then she abuses that power until people push back. She did the same thing at my school's PTA, at our church, everywhere. And when people stand up to her, she escalates until she either wins or burns everything down." "I am sorry you had to grow up with that," I said sincerely. "Thank you. I just wanted you to know that not everyone in our family is like her. And I wanted to tell you that what you did, taking her to court, standing up to her, was the right thing. She needed to face consequences, and I am glad you did not back down." We talked for another hour. Brenda told me about her childhood, about growing up with a mother who treated every interaction as a battle to be won. She told me about her father, who had finally divorced Brenda after 30 years of marriage, unable to take the constant conflict anymore. She told me about her own struggles to build healthy relationships and set boundaries. By the end of the conversation, I felt a deep sympathy for Brenda. She had been a victim of Brenda's behavior far longer than any of us in Maplewood Estates. "I hope you can move forward," I said as we prepared to leave. "You seem like you are doing well despite everything." "I am trying. Therapy helps. And distance." I moved to Boston specifically to get away from her, but I still feel responsible somehow, like I should have warned people about her. "That is not your responsibility. Your mother's actions are her own." She smiled sadly. "I know, but it is hard not to feel that way." We said goodbye, and I watched her walk to her car. I felt a strange mix of emotions: anger at Brenda for the damage she had caused, sympathy for Brenda, and relief that the whole ordeal was finally, truly over. When I got home, Rachel was waiting for me, anxious to hear what had happened. I told her everything, and she listened quietly. "That is really sad," she said when I finished. "I mean, Brenda is still terrible, but knowing what her daughter went through gives some context." "It does not excuse anything," I said firmly, "but it does explain it. Hurt people, I guess." "So is it really over now?" I thought about it. "Yeah, I think it is." And it was. Deanna sent me a thank you email a few days later saying that our conversation had been helpful and that she hoped I had found peace. I wrote back wishing her well and meaning it. Spring came to Maplewood Estates, bringing with it warmer weather and new beginnings. The community garden that Margaret had organized was flourishing, with residents planting vegetables and flowers in their assigned plots. The playground equipment had been updated, and kids were out playing every afternoon. The HOA newsletter actually contained useful information about community events rather than lists of violations and fines. Rachel and I got engaged in April. I proposed on a hike through the Cuyahoga Valley National Park at a scenic overlook where you could see for miles. She said yes before I even finished asking the question. We planned a small wedding for the fall, and to our surprise and delight, many of our Maplewood Estates neighbors wanted to be involved. Margaret offered to host the reception at the community clubhouse. Frank volunteered to handle the music, and several other neighbors offered to help with decorations and food. "This is what community is supposed to be," Rachel said one evening as we went over the wedding plans. "People coming together to support each other and celebrate together." "It is pretty great," I agreed. "Hard to believe this is the same neighborhood that was tearing itself apart a year ago. The wedding in October was perfect." The weather cooperated, giving us a beautiful autumn day with golden sunshine and just enough of a chill to make it feel like fall. The clubhouse was decorated with pumpkins and fall flowers, and the ceremony was simple but meaningful. Frank's music selections were spot on and the food was delicious. During the reception, Margaret gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. When Lucas first moved to Maplewood Estates, our community was in trouble. We had lost sight of what really mattered, and we were more focused on rules than relationships. Lucas reminded us that a neighborhood is made up of people, not regulations. His willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult, inspired all of us to do better. So here is to Lucas and Rachel. May your marriage be filled with the same courage, kindness, and common sense that you both bring to our community. Everyone raised their glasses, and I felt overwhelmed with gratitude. What had started as a nightmare with an overbearing HOA president had somehow led to this: a loving marriage, a supportive community, and genuine friendships. As Rachel and I danced our first dance as a married couple, I caught sight of my salt spreader through the clubhouse window, sitting in my garage across the street. It was just a simple red plastic tool, but it had become a symbol of something much bigger: the importance of standing up for yourself, the value of community, and the truth that doing the right thing, even when it is hard, will ultimately lead to good things. The music played, Rachel smiled up at me, and I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. And if some future HOA president ever tried to tell me I could not use my salt spreader, well, I had a whole community of people who would have my back. Life in Maplewood Estates had come full circle. What had once been a place of conflict and control was now a thriving community where people looked out for each other, supported each other, and yes, properly salted their walkways in winter without fear of harassment. As for Brenda Oakley, she served her time in prison and was released after 2 years on good behavior. I heard through the grapevine that she moved to Florida, far away from Cleveland and hopefully from any HOA positions. I wished her well in a distant sort of way and hoped she had learned something from her experience. The following winter, when the first big snowstorm hit, I was ready with my trusty salt spreader. But this time, I was not alone. Frank, Margaret, and several other neighbors had bought their own spreaders, and we went up and down the streets together, making sure all the sidewalks were safe for everyone. As we worked, laughing and chatting in the cold morning air, I realized that this was what I had wanted all along: not to cause trouble, not to fight with anyone, just to live in a place where people cared about each other and worked together to make life a little better for everyone. And all it had taken was a $40 salt spreader and the courage to use it.